just met with the local ranch owner. They exchanged some pleasantries in Spanish that we obviously don't understand, and we got pointed in a new direction, so who knows what that means.
We're not on a road anymore, apparently, so... Shit.
Yeah. I guess you're probably wondering how we got here. Let me explain. This is us, Amy and Chase, in our 40-year-old Volkswagen van, Bullwinkle, at the southern tip of Mexico's Baja Peninsula, nearly 1,000 miles from the US border, putting on our best, everything is fine, everything is great, faces. Not pictured here are the internals of our van's 40-year-old automatic transmission, which, more than 1,000 miles earlier, had started to catastrophically self-destruct from the inside out. Also not pictured here, in the glove box of said self-destructing van, is my passport, conveniently threatening to expire in less than 10 days. And it was somewhere around this moment that we realized from here on out, life as we knew it was going to have to change. When we left for Baja in the winter of 2022, we'd been living in Bullwinkle for 3 years, and though traveling full-time and maintaining an antique vehicle had never been easy, the thought that one day, whether in the near or distant future, we'd stop doing it, had barely crossed our minds. Our limitations, daily stresses, and uncertainty had become one of those inexorable facts of life. Besides, wasn't that the point of van life anyway? Living every day in the present moment, never knowing where tomorrow might take you? Well, sort of. In the grand scheme of things, our growing backlog of increasingly frustrating vehicle maintenance felt like a good problem to have. After all, who wouldn't take a few hours of greasy hands and bloody knuckles for the opportunity to live life on your own terms, out in the world manifesting your childhood dreams of endless summer? And for a long time, the scales had tipped in our favor. We were having fun. core group of friends with increasingly reliable vehicles sharing a common goal, to travel far, embrace the unknown, and extract as much out of every experience as our hearts could handle, things were good. And even when they weren't, so far, at the blistering pace of about 45 miles an hour, we've been able to keep the inevitable realities of life just a few steps behind us. But like so many things, time has a way of catching up with you. And soon, what individually felt like 1,000 little unrelated and inconsequential hiccups began to coalesce in an undeniable truth. Our beloved Bullwinkle, the vessel that had initially opened so many doors and served as our gateway to ultimate freedom, was now the only thing holding us back from achieving true autonomy. And though when we left for Baja a month earlier, we'd planned to explore the northern mountains for a rarely seen and scarcely divulged treasure, a unique strain of native Mexican rainbow trout, we knew our plans would have to wait. Getting home in one piece was going to be a feat in and of itself. The details of how exactly we accomplished that feat is a story for another time, but I think the vacant look in my eyes as we limped into an In-N-Out burger across the border around midnight less than 2 days later should provide an idea. Back in Montana, we set about the task of figuring out what's next. We knew there wasn't a platform on Earth that could provide the same personality as Bullwinkle. Maybe we were just getting older, but all of a sudden we found ourselves throwing around words like comfort and reliability a lot. And when you're asking for reliability, one manufacturer's name seems to come up time and time again.
Somebody did it right.
Four-wheel drive vehicles are very much part of the modern transportation scene.
Feeling of power in motion. Freedom, that's what it's all about.
The power, the performance, and the handling.
I like the feeling of going where I want, when I want.
What do you think?
It's crazy. It's ours. It's so weird. It's like as tall as me. Feels crazy and a little scary to drive this. It feels very precious.
Turbo power.
All right, are we ready?
Yeah. Here we go.
We never expected that turning a pickup truck, a vehicle that no one ever designed or expected to be turned into a full-time home, into our full-time home, would be easy. But the next 6 months would undoubtedly be the most complicated, expensive, and outright exhausting experience of our lives. Step 1. Acknowledge that you've spent the last decade learning and working on nothing but antique Volkswagens. Step 2. Find a shop that knows something, anything, about building out trucks. Step 3. Realize that if you want the best, you're going to have to travel. And in this case, the best are the folks at Mainline Overland, and Mainline is on the other side of the country. Time to drive. Step 4. Let the professionals handle the next 100 steps. Starting with the fact that you bought a truck so new, most of the companies you're relying on to provide the parts you need to complete the build haven't even designed them yet. Oh right, and remember that you wanted the best? The best flatbeds are made in Australia. Better get that old bed off and start measuring, because there aren't any Tundras in Oz. And if you're off by a millimeter, 3 months from now when that flatbed arrives, it's going to be a 600-pound paperweight. Oh yeah, what about wheels? Which ones do we want?
45.
Are they rated for the weight? Will they fit?
Seems like an inch, at least an inch between them.
How far will they stick out? Does that matter? Shit, this is getting complicated.
Good space between the upper control arm and the tire.
The 8.5 plus 25.
Yeah.
These are welded. Looks like it goes back to here. So if you cut this away, you still have like the front.
Because the concern is when this is completely turned.
Did I mention no one's making the suspension components we need yet? Things will come together, right? Anyway, hotels are expensive. We gotta get back to Montana. Airports. Haven't been in one of these for a while. Oh yeah, the van. Gotta do something about that. But not right now. First we gotta get to Patagonia. We have a work thing to do there, but mostly it's just an excuse to travel with our friends and see something new. More airports, big cities, loud streets. Charcuterie.
Oh yeah, it's not.
A couple more flights. and breathe. Now, I know I've been skipping over a lot here, and I wish I could say that things were about to slow down, but they weren't. Patagonia was amazing. Too amazing to express in so little time, but for a month we hiked, saw glaciers, mountains, rivers, and the kind of crazy wildlife you'd expect to find at the other end of the world. Friends got engaged. We hiked some more and even caught the world's most iconic sunrise. And all the while, our cohorts back in the US and Australia were hard at work bringing our new dream to life. A couple more airports and a few flights later, and we were back in Montana. A brief reminder that we still hadn't dealt with the van, and it was more flights, a couple more hotels, and finally, the first look at our newly completed truck. And boy, was she beautiful. This was a big moment for us. Particularly for Amy, who'd spent almost the entirety of the last 6 months agonizing over every inch of the build.
It doesn't even feel like it's actually ours.
Though she couldn't physically weld the flatbed or bumper or assemble the components into the behemoth that now stood before us, the end results were as much a product of her hard work as anyone's. But we were only halfway to having a new and sustainable home. So without too much lingering, we loaded up our old parts, drove them down to North Carolina where Amy's family would help us sell them to offset costs, and began yet another journey coast to coast where our camper was waiting for us in California.
Just spent our first night sleeping in the cab. It got pretty chilly last night, down into the 20s. Who's that? Who is that? Who's that?
Who's that? This was arguably the single most significant moment for us since our wedding day.
So if we come over here, we might get close to seeing our camper. Do we want to do that? I'm scared. I'm scared. I don't know.
But for the folks at Four Wheel Campers, it was about as casual as any of the other several hundred installs that year.
Do we want to just go see it? Like on our own? Or no?
And as we watched the final piece of our year-long puzzle make its way onto the flatbed, we were feeling pretty good.
It's so cool. I feel like it looks great. I'm just so scared.
Just a few moments to catch our breath, and it was back to Montana.
It's been raining since we picked up the truck. Because of the way the storm's moving, we've essentially been stuck in some pretty intense weather the whole time, non-stop rain, and now it's just turned to snow. Here we go. It'll keep snowing. What do you think? Oh, you like it or you hate it? My goodness, what? Oh. It's okay. This is your new house. Like his complete lack of regard for things.
It's time to switch our lives out of the van and into the truck. Oh my God, the van! We seriously need to do something about that. Later. Right now, we really need to get back to Baja. It was approaching -40 in Montana, and we desperately needed to find some warmer weather so we could finally settle into our new home. Now, if we can just make it out of the Rockies alive, we'll be good. we made it. It took 1 year, more money than we could realistically afford or care to admit, and an insane amount of hard work both from us and our friends all around the world, but we were finally back at the Mexican border, ready to pick up where we'd left off what seemed like a lifetime ago. If you live in the United States, chances are your perceptions of Mexico are polarizing.
We are a nation of immigrants.
But we are also a nation of laws.
I'd like to see something done about the illegal alien problem.
Smugglers and traffickers.
But we have some bad hombres here, and we're going to get them out.
Build that wall! Build that wall! Build that wall!
Geographically, Mexico is the primary bridge between Central and South America and the US and Canada. Many, if not most, of the illicit drugs sold and consumed up north are trafficked from Central America through Mexico. Coupled with the fact that the vast majority of Mexico's population lives in some form of poverty, an economy of crime and violence has grown roots there. And nowhere is that crime more rampant than along the US-Mexico border.
Dozens of stores, cars, buses, and trucks set on fire.
And even if you're not acutely aware of those risks when you cross it, it won't take long before you notice the stark contrast between the cities north of the border and those south of it. And sure, to our northern sensibilities, the initial onslaught of loud, crowded, and dirty cities can be startling. But the truth is, most folks down here aren't any different from those back home. People are kind, warm, and hardworking, and would do just about anything to help a stranger in need. But we weren't here to explore the city.
Son 7020.
Gracias.
Bonito día.
Once you start driving south, it doesn't take long for Baja to reveal its true majesty. Oh right, Baja. I guess at this point I should probably explain what and where Baja is. Baja California is a 750-mile-long peninsula in the far western reaches of Mexico. On its western coast, it faces the Pacific Ocean, extending continuously southward from California, and on its eastern shore lies the Gulf of California, also known as the Sea of Cortez. Cortez as in the Spanish conquistador, as in the first Europeans to reach Mexico who, if you remember your history, made quick work of claiming the land for themselves and decimating local populations and culture in the process. They're the reason we'd be speaking embarrassingly bad Spanish for the next 2 months. And while the Spanish explorers may have discovered both mainland Mexico and Baja in the 1500s, human beings have been living here for over 10,000 years, and those first inhabitants' presence can still be felt today, written in stone. Because the line separating the US and Mexico is geographically arbitrary, the landscape and ecosystems transition seamlessly. Most of us familiar with California know that it's one of the most beautiful and enticing landscapes in the country, which is likely the reason that nearly 13% of the US's 330 million people have decided to live there. Well, Baja's ecology is every bit as captivating as California's, but thanks to a handful of geopolitical obstacles, it has a fraction of the population. And Unlike the rest of Mexico, where 80% of the population lives in its major cities, the vast majority of Baja's people live in its few urban centers, which are located near the US border and on its southern tip, leaving hundreds and hundreds of miles of wildlands in between that have remained essentially unchanged since time immemorial. And for people like us, that's the true magic of Baja. The ability to explore and experience an area that feels like the California coast must have felt 250 years ago, before the beachfront mansions and sprawling highways forever changed its unique and irreplaceable landscape. It's a place that feels both eerily familiar and unlike anything we've ever seen or experienced before. Baja has nearly 2,000 miles of coastline, which is the primary draw for tourists like us. Because outside of the few famous vacation hubs along its southern shores, most of that coast is quiet and empty. And thanks to Baja's lax regulations around camping, it's free for anyone willing to thrash their vehicles reaching it to stay as long as they want. And the abundance and diversity of life both along those coasts and directly off them make the Baja Peninsula a truly unique ecological treasure. In fact, the Sea of Cortez has the highest rate of biodiversity of any body of water on Earth, which is why it caught the attention of this guy in the 1940s when he first showcased its wonders to the general public and crowned it the aquarium of the world. Along with thousands of fish and plant species, the Sea of Cortez is home to nearly 40% of the world's marine mammals. And because of Baja's remoteness and rugged terrain, much of what we know about its ecology, both marine and terrestrial, has only been described by modern science in the last 80 years. So in some small way, Baja still feels like some kind of frontier. In a world where so much of what can be known already is, Baja reminds us that there's still magic and wonder left in wild places if you're willing to seek it out. But the truth is, every year, a little more of that magic is lost. 10 years ago, there were still hundreds of miles of unpaved roads between Baja's two states, Norte and Sur, and traversing the peninsula took a true Herculean effort, both for vehicles and their drivers. 30 years before that, there were still giant stretches only accessible by mule. It was a barrier to entry that kept only the strangest and toughest adventurers from exploring its vast interior. But today, a trans-peninsular highway can transport even the most timid of travelers from California to Cabo and back without ever leaving pavement. We'll never know the past magic of Baja, no matter how badly we wish we could. Progress marches on, and like so much of the world's last wild places, day by day, Baja is being dragged into modernity, whether it wants to be or not. But lucky for us, you don't have to venture too far off the pavement to catch a glimpse of the Baja of old. Out there in the deserts and the mountains, there are still places shrouded in mystery, where cacti outnumber people and old vaqueros know the way better than any map. And it just so happens, that's exactly where we needed to go. We were looking for something that almost no one comes to Baja looking for: trout. And while these days trout have been transported and propagated on nearly every continent on Earth, these trout were special. They were native to Baja and had evolved there on their own for millennia. They were first discovered over a century ago by American naturalists compiling a record of Baja's flora and fauna. In 1905, Edward Nelson, chief of the U.S. Bureau of Biological Survey, collected and returned 9 fish to the United States, where they were first described by renowned ichthyologist Barton Everman, who proclaimed them a new species and named them Salmo nelsoni, after Nelson, their collector, who, by the way, has just a few other species names under his belt. Commonly referred to as Nelson's trout, they're in fact a genetically unique subspecies of rainbow trout, now reclassified as Oncorhynchus mykiss nelsoni, native to only 15 miles of one single stream tucked away deep in the mountains. And how exactly they ended up there is somewhat of a mystery. Come to think of it, we should probably talk about those mountains. Baja California is known for its beautiful beaches and expansive deserts, but rarely do you hear about its mountain ranges. And one range in particular, the Sierra San Pedro Martir, is by far the most magnificent. Rising sharply from the shores of the Pacific, the San Pedro Martir reaches a staggering height of over 10,000 feet. This immense prominence means that the ecology of the mountains transition between 5 unique biospheres, each isolated from those above and below. Mountains like these are known as sky islands. And much like real islands, the plants and animals that live on them are often completely unique. Sitting atop the spine of the San Pedro Martir is a protected national park, and in the 1970s, a road was cut to its top to access a site for a world-class astronomical observatory. In 2007, that road was paved, making it possible to drive from the arid desert down below to towering pine forests and snow-covered peaks in only a few hours. And it's on the western slope of these mountains that at the end of the last ice age, the Baja California rainbow trout found a new home. We can't know for sure exactly how they got there, but recent genetic analysis can give us some idea. Our best guess is that coastal rainbow trout, not too dissimilar from the steelhead of Northern California, made a 100-mile-plus journey down the coast where they entered the mouth of the Santo Domingo River. The catch is that today the mouth of the Santo Domingo is normally dry. The river is fed by perennial springs and snowmelt coming off the San Pedro Martir, but by the time it reaches the coast, it's all dried up, and in its place are giant impassable sandbars. But on rare occasions, during only the largest storm events, water cascading down the mountains will overwhelm the sands below and burst through into the Pacific. And it had to have been during one of these violent storms that an ambitious group of trout, spurred by an evolutionary drive to explore and expand their territory, found their way into the headwaters of the Santo Domingo. And by some stroke of cosmic luck, their new Sky Island home was a perfect fit, providing everything they needed to survive and flourish. As the floodwaters receded and the mouth of the river dried back up, they were trapped. And though they were able to survive, the forces at play in Mexico's waters provided new challenges, and with no other options, they were forced to adapt and evolve to meet them. And now, over 10,000 years later, they're a completely different fish found nowhere else on Earth, uniquely adapted to a single stretch of one single stream in the remote mountains of northern Baja. And we were about to try and find them.
So right now it's 32 sustained and 51 mile an hour gusts. We're at near gale conditions, 40 degrees, 28 with the wind chill, by 6, 34 sustained, 57 wind gusts, 25 with the wind chill, but then by 8 we're coming into heavy rain, 34 sustained, 61 gusts, 22 with the wind chill. We'll just backtrack a little bit to the other side of the mountains here, where it was a little bit sunnier, warmer. Let's regroup over there, I guess.
Information on how to access this area of Baja is limited, and what little can be gleaned from old maps, literature, or even local advice should be taken with a heavy grain of salt.
Sometimes we make plans and like the weather has other ideas, but I feel like this happens to us a lot.
The truth is, no one really comes here. Outside of a few local ranchers and off-road racers, there's no reason to come here. There's no amenities or resources, just hard, rugged country. When the roads wash out, no one comes to maintain them, and it's understood that when you leave the pavement, you're on your own. This would be by far the rarest and most remote fish we'd ever chased after, and it would never have been possible without the capabilities of our new home. But even in a new truck, the mountains are still in charge.
16 mile an hour to 31 gusts at midnight. 17 mile an hour to 35 gusts at 2. That seems like better wind conditions than what's here.
After a few days on the beach waiting out the storms, we made another pass at reaching the water. Though the maze of fragmented roads we'd used to navigate the mountains would total less than 30 miles, it would take the better part of 5 hours to complete. This was the first time we'd really put our truck to the test, and we were still figuring out what we could and couldn't do with it. With each new obstacle, our brains were slowly being rewired from nearly a decade of travel in Bullwinkle. And though we'd only see one other vehicle in our travels through this country, it was a startling reminder of just how much farther we could be pushing ours.
In 200 meters, your destination will be on the left.
We reached the river at nightfall, and things felt off. What little we could make out of the river looked strange, but we tried our best to get some restless sleep, knowing that we'd have to wait till morning to get a proper look at what we'd come all this way for.
By the time we got here, it was dark and we couldn't really see the water, but I took a stroll this morning and it's not looking immediately promising. There's clearly been some pretty extreme flood damage here. The little river valley that we're in just looks like a disaster zone, and where the river is flowing, it's very, very shallow and very, very silty. It's hard to imagine catching any fish out of the water that at least is directly in front of us. There is a road paralleling the stream for a little ways. I don't think that we're gonna fit with our truck, but the plan for today is to just walk the road and see if eventually we get to anywhere that looks a little bit better. We'll see what the day brings.
Doesn't look great.
We could never have planned for this. What little information exists about finding Nelson's trout had led us here. We'd even been told by the world's leading expert, a man who's dedicated nearly 40 years of his career as a fisheries biologist to the study of Baja's trout, that this spot was our best bet. But unbeknownst to him and probably anyone with a vested interest in these fish, the river had been hit hard by Hurricane K a few months earlier.
As Hurricane K heads for the U.S.-Mexico border, it's wreaking havoc on Mexico's Pacific coast.
Right now, it is a Category 2 hurricane, and we are expecting it to probably stay intact to at least a Category 1.
Tearing through beach resorts, littering streets with rubble as severe wind, intense rain, and flash flooding make their way towards Baja.
This was the same storm that decimated roadways in Death Valley National Park. And down in Baja, it dumped nearly 15 inches of rain in only 24 hours. The effects of that water seem to have been particularly concentrated here. Because of the area's remoteness and lack of importance to the general public, no one we'd spoken to had been back here to see the damage. And sadly, we feared the worst.
So this is bad. Really bad. We're starting to get a clearer picture of what happened here. And it's complete devastation. The flooding here has been catastrophic, to say the least. We obviously never got to see this river before the flooding, so I mean, seen a couple old photographs from the 1930s where it certainly appeared to be a normal, healthy mountain stream that you'd expect trout to do well in. But there's essentially nothing left of that. The floods washed what has to be billions of tons of sediment into the river, and now that's pretty much all that's left is water running over sand. And when a river gets choked out with sand and sediment like that, it can't oxygenate the way it's supposed to, and the aquatic insects can't survive and will die out, and the fish are soon to follow. I would be very, very surprised if we end up seeing any trout today. My optimism from earlier this morning is fading quickly. Rivers are incredibly dynamic. The river certainly will recover from this, but it could take years. And what few fish might have survived the initial onslaught of the floodwaters, they don't have gravel to spawn in, so the likelihood that they'll continue to reproduce successfully seems really, really slim and unlikely. The devastation is beautiful in its scale, but it's kind of heartbreaking in a way too, thinking about the river that used to be here and how that river will likely never be the same. But you never know. Fish are incredibly resilient. They evolved to survive conditions like this, and remarkably, they find places to hide amongst the torrent. But again, even if they survived, what future they would have in a stream that's just completely suffocated by sand and sediment like this, I have no idea. And the river, you know, it's doing what rivers do. It's hard at work flushing this sediment through. You can see it, you know, happening right underneath your feet. But can it do it in time to save the trout? I don't know. Time will tell.
It seemed unfathomable that after surviving in these mountains for thousands of years, we could have missed the Baja California rainbow trout by only a few months. In fact, it seemed too unfathomable to be true.
A lot of like really flat-faced rocks that want to slide down, but it gets like a little easier and then a little harder.
Unwilling to give up on ourselves or the fish, the following day, we pushed farther. Over a mile above the devastation, things started to change. Large granite boulders and bedrock ledges had blocked some of the torrents and left a few small protected areas that still resembled a normal trout stream. It wasn't much, but there was hope. They were few and far between, but it was the first time we felt like if there were fish left, we'd find them there. And eventually, we did. Almost every cast went unanswered. But finally, after days of bushwhacking and thousands of presentations, 2 fish made it to the net. The resiliency of nature is at times miraculous. How something that appears so small and delicate could have survived forces so magnificently destructive is hard to imagine. But it's these specific traits that made these fish what they are. The environment in Baja's mountains is extreme and unpredictable, and if it weren't for their incredible adaptations, these fish would have never made it to the 21st century. Nature's systems are so complex that we often can't understand them. But here, in our hands, in vibrant iridescent bronze, olive, and rose hues, was living proof of the magic still left in the wild corners of the world. The population had taken a massive hit, but as long as only a few fish had survived, given time, they would repopulate. We'd done it. After more than a year of planning and hard work, we'd found Nelson's trout. Except, there was a catch. You know how earlier I said that Nelson's trout were native to only 15 miles of one stream? Well, that's true. But this stream wasn't it. Let me explain. In the century following their discovery, a handful of folks other than us have taken a keen interest in Nelson's trout. And one, perhaps more keen than any other, was a man named Charles Edward Utt, or C.E. for short. C.E. was a Californian rancher, businessman, and naturalist who in the late 1930s decided that something needed to be done about the seemingly precarious nature of Baja's only native trout. Worrying that such a small population could be vulnerable to catastrophe, C.E. and a few of his colleagues, Phil and Tom Meling, who operated a nearby ranch in the San Pedro Martir, collected fingerling trout from their native waters and set about the task of repopulating them into other area streams. Some were connected to their endemic stream but had barriers the fish couldn't overcome, and others were in separate drainages, like this one. For years, the men made journey after journey by mule with 5-gallon milk cans full of fish through the arduous mountain terrain. Many of their transplant attempts failed, but a few were successful. Today, this wouldn't be considered sound fisheries science, and it's indicative of a time when we believed we knew better than nature, and if nothing else, felt entitled to want to improve it to better suit our own vision. For those of us that love these native fish, we're not complaining about UT's contingency plan for them, but finding them in these waters certainly isn't the authentically wild experience we were after. Later, there's still only a handful of streams that contain Nelson's trout, but only one of them is their true native water. And we wanted to see it. The only issue was that it was the most remote and difficult to access. We'd also been told that accessing it meant traversing private land, and we'd need an escort. So we did the only thing we could do. Get back to cell phone service and start making some calls.
Hola, ¿tú hablas inglés? I was hoping to reach Rancho Meling to inquire about a field guide to access a certain area on their land. Okay, my name is Amy. Perfect, thank you so much. So they're giving my number and name to the correct person who will be calling me back shortly.
They didn't. So we did the next best thing. Just show up and start knocking on doors. Somehow, between our broken Spanish and the locals' general lack of understanding for where we wanted to go and why on earth we'd even want to go there, we managed to fumble our way into an agreement. We'd spend the night at Rancho Meling, and in the morning, a local rancher named Rolando would be there to guide us to the river.
It's hard to sort of quantify. There's remote, and we're used to remote in the United States, and then there's Mexican remote. Rolando is going to drive us out there, help us navigate the road, which has all sorts of offshoots that we could get lost on, get us to the trailhead, and then he's going to turn around and go home, and we're on our own from there. So we'll still have to, depending on how bad the road is, if we make it there once, we're still going to have to drive it again to get back out. They prefaced this whole thing with the fact that the road to get there is very bad. We don't really know what that means, but I would say if the locals here who are used to pretty bad roads are warning you that the road is bad, it's probably going to be pretty bad. In fact, there's some speculation that it might not even be passable. No one that they know has been in there in over a year, and a year ago it was bad, and no one goes out and grades these roads. So, and the hike is an hour. They said 5 kilometers, so about 3 miles over some pretty mountainous terrain to get down into the river. And who knows what we're going to find there, because no one's been there in over a year. And this past year, there was horrendous flooding, which we saw firsthand the effects of on the last river. And I should also mention that Rolando, to the best of our knowledge, doesn't speak hardly any English. And our Spanish is mediocre at best. That's generous to say it's mediocre at best. You could basically say we don't speak Spanish. Sun's not really up, but it started at 3:50 anyway. How you feeling? Ready to tackle whatever the day brings?
I mean, I guess so. I'm a little tired. It's a little cold. Just gonna let Levi drive.
Sorry, guy.
When Rolando arrived, two things were immediately apparent. He truly spoke zero English, and he was also nearly blind, so he'd enlisted the help of his wife to drive. This is the part where I'd normally make some joke about the blind leading the blind, but the truth was, we were too anxious to joke around.
I mean, how bad could it be if they're planning on taking that cart in?
Our new home was barely a month old, and we were about to take it somewhere that was almost sure to thrash it to bits. Unable to communicate any of the finer points of what lay ahead, we settled for a few listos and took off. At first, the fact that Rolando and his wife were driving a stock Durango seemed like a good thing. How bad could the road really be if they had full confidence to tackle it in a small SUV? We'd soon learn that the Durango's small size was actually its greatest asset.
So Rolando just met with a local ranch owner out here. They exchanged some pleasantries in Spanish that we obviously don't understand, and we got pointed in a new direction, so who knows what that means.
We're not on a road anymore, apparently, so...
Oh, there's a gate down there. Well, there's a gate, there's a road. Isn't that how the old saying goes?
Over the next several hours, the roads got progressively narrower and the dirt progressively softer. Suddenly, obstacles that were moderately challenging for the Durango became outright daunting for a vehicle nearly twice the size and weight. And eventually, having only come 4 miles in 2.5 hours, with a projected 6 miles to go and an assurance from Rolando that the roads would only get worse as we went, we pulled the plug.
Well, we're turning around. We were close, but the road is too bad.
The fact was that even if our truck could handle the roads ahead, which we had doubts about, we just weren't ready. We weren't experienced enough behind the wheels of our new machine to confidently navigate the terrain, and we certainly weren't ready to face the consequences should we fail to. If we were going to reach the Trout, we'd have to find another way. But in an ironic twist of fate, it would be this unassuming obstacle, a discarded 800-pound cart full of cordwood, that would end up breaking us. We'd already made it around this cart once, earlier that morning.
You good?
I wanted to be able to get over the other side. That first entry, it was just a huge slope there.
Yeah.
And you saw how close the camper was.
Yeah, it was close.
But on the return trip, Baja had other plans.
Ah, fuck.
This trip just took a really I don't know what the fuck to say. The metal edges of that wagon caught the side of the camper. We were in a very precarious position where we couldn't really stop. We kind of had to roll through. The camper was, we were tipped practically at a 45, we were concerned about rolling, so Amy did the best that she could. That thing caught the camper and it gouged a huge scrape and sort of tear out of the top. driver's side on the camper. Damaged the window, bent our mounting system on the back for our gas cans and max tracks. Amy, in particular, put so much work into getting this build to where it was. I mean, it was pretty much her full-time job and sole focus for the better part of the last 6 to 9 months. And it's incredibly expensive, and we're like way overextended on it. It's the most expensive thing we've ever bought, apart or together, by a magnitude of 10, if that gives you some indication. It was so scary to even commit to doing it, and then to get this insanely expensive thing and to damage it badly so quickly. It's just fucking gut-wrenching. I was the one really pushing to do this trip and to try and find these fish, and she had voiced her concerns, especially about the road. She told me how uncomfortable she was. I understood how uncomfortable she was, and I'm the type of person who thinks that, like, if you push through some of that discomfort, you might be heavily rewarded. You know, a lot of things in life are really uncomfortable at first. This did not end up being one of those cases. She went against her better instincts and paid the price. And she's, you know, really distraught. We don't know how we're gonna fix it. Like anything, it's fixable. We know it's fixable. We don't know what that's gonna look like, how long that's gonna take, what it's gonna cost us, but in some weird twist of fate, our guide has brought us back to his own ranch, which has flowing through it a tributary of the Santo Domingo, which we were trying to access, another tributary of the Santo Domingo. And he says that there are truchas, or trout, here in the river. We're here. Whenever I'm looking for answers, things that I can't quite grapple with, I go fishing. So I'm gonna go fishing.
And sure enough, tucked away in the hills behind Rolando's ranch, there was a small, clear stream that seemed to have survived the worst of last season's storms.
I can't really even film any of this. The brush is so thick getting in and out of here that I had to ditch the tripod because I couldn't squeeze it through the places I needed to squeeze through with my camera and the fly rod. But here's the stream. I don't even know how I'd land a fish if I hooked one in here. And I was heading back with my tail in between my legs and saw a small little pocket and dangled a fly in there, and bam, there he was. A Baja California rainbow trout. We came a long way to see this fish and paid for it dearly, in fact, but in some strange way, I don't know, call me crazy, it feels worth it. I know there's gonna come a day where this will just be some crazy story we tell ourselves about this time we went chasing trout in Mexico. And from wherever we're standing then, it'll seem a million miles away and all this heartache will be over. That's what life's all about, right? Going on crazy adventures, making stupid mistakes. In the end, I'm really glad to be here experiencing this, because there aren't a lot of people who get to do it.
In my heart, I knew that we'd be back to try again. But for now, we desperately needed to get as far away from the San Pedro Martir as possible. We had a decision to make. Head back to the US and sort out the damage to the camper a mere week and a half into our Baja journey, or turn south, where our friends, warm beaches, and bottomless fish tacos were waiting. Yeah, I think we made the right choice. It was February, and the beauty of Baja was on full display. It was peak travel time down south for other nomads like us, and we knew we could count on seeing some familiar faces. Our friends Mac, Owen, Carissa, and Lindbergh were down in Sur, and we didn't waste any time getting to them. There we'd connect with other friends, some old and some new. For the first time, we were really getting to settle into our new home and build new routines. No real objective to the days. We just wanted to enjoy the land, water, and people around us. Some days we'd chase good weather or food. Others we'd stay put and marvel at the sunset. If we found a quiet beach, we'd spend a week getting lost in the tide pools and reefs. And if there was rumor of a good swell, we'd spend days chasing around the surf. Though Baja may have changed a lot in the last 50 years, here, in our own little world, there was still magic all around us. Time has a funny way of sneaking up on you. And suddenly, it was spring. Our winter rambling had come to an end, and the group were splitting off on their next adventures. Enough time had passed to soothe the sting of February's catastrophe, and we felt ready for another shot at the San Pedro Martir. We'd spent the last month studying satellite imagery, trying to figure out where we'd gone wrong, and searching out routes that might be more forgiving. This time around, we'd do it our own way, in hopes that our years of experience in remote country and on back roads back home would see us through. Back in the northern mountains, spring had arrived. An exceptionally wet year had given way to lush and vibrant blankets of wildflowers. And we, feeling renewed by our journey to the tropics, were brimming with optimism. Maybe a little too much optimism. If there was ever a doubt as to why Rolando hadn't taken us this way in the first place, it was now abundantly clear. As it turns out, a couple of gringos with smartphones are in fact no substitute for the knowledge of people who have been living in these mountains for centuries. We immediately recognized the telltale signs of a road that wouldn't get any better and could easily end in tragedy.
Nothing ever translates intensity quite as well. It's just being here.
And truth be told, there's a chance we could have made it. The road was at the upper limits of what we thought we could handle, at least in the immediate half mile we could see ahead. But with nearly 8 more miles to go, we knew it wasn't worth it. Not only were the roads in poor shape, but their steepness and camber meant that any mistake, however small, could have dire consequences. Maybe we'd be able to tackle the next obstacle in front of us. What about the next one, and the next? What about the seemingly inconspicuous little things you hardly notice until it's too late? As painful as it was to admit, we'd learned our lesson. We may have built ourselves a tool that was 1,000 times more capable than anything else we'd ever owned, but in the end, it was still just a tool, and no tool can do everything. We weren't in an OHV designed to be hammered and broken on the trail. We were carrying our home on our backs, and destroying it for a lack of patience didn't feel right. In life, it seems that for every door you open, another 3 are waiting behind it. And though we hadn't yet found the keys to unlock them, we knew that one day we would. There's a lot of ways we could have reached the native waters of Nelson's Trout, but this wasn't it. And at that moment, it was all we had. But that didn't mean we were finished. Amy still hadn't caught a Baja California rainbow trout of her own, and we knew just the place to find them. returning to Rolando's ranch different people, shaped by the experiences that had led us there. And likewise, we were met by a different river. Spring had brought new life to the canyon, and what little I had learned from our first visit was now useless. It was like we were exploring the stream for the first time, each corner revealing a new feature that hadn't existed a few months earlier. And as the leaves began to sprout, the banks were slowly closing in. Soon, these waters would be near inaccessible. But for now, we had a brief window and one last chance to make contact with one of the world's rarest trout. And just like the rest of the mountains, they were waking up.
That was a good one.
In the end, this wasn't the experience we thought we were after chasing Nelson's trout, but it was the one we needed. Here, just a few miles from where they were discovered over a century ago, the fish were thriving. They were every bit as beautiful and wondrous as we thought they'd be, and our time spent living alongside them in Baja's Sierra San Pedro Martir had left us forever changed.
Could try to explain, although nobody's asking. Whatever it takes,
for a brief moment, we were connected to something bigger than ourselves, to a story thousands of years in the making, and one that's still being written today. Would we eventually make it to the headwaters of the Santo Domingo and witness them in their native pools? Probably. But that would be a new adventure, with its own challenges, triumphs, and failures.
So glad to be here, forever distracted. I think I might stay. Just enough to make it through. I like it this way, don't you?
Our time in Mexico had come to an end, but it felt like our time back home was just beginning. With fresh eyes, new perspectives, and an ever so slightly broken in new truck, we couldn't wait to see what kind of trouble we'd get into next. If Baja had taught us one thing, it's that whatever lay ahead was sure to surprise us.